We'd like to welcome each and every individual to Podcast for CPA EQ for CPAs and those we serve. And today we're going to be continuing in the podcast series of becoming a problem solver. Or soon we're looking at how do we prevent problems from coming up in the first place. So problem preventer. We've gone through, communications. We're going through the 12 skills to perfect, to become a great problem solver. So we've gone through communications, and then asking questions, and then active listener, and today's thinking outside the box. Bill, why would you say that Shannon and Misty are so good at thinking outside the box?
They're open-minded to different concepts and different people. Everybody's different, and they pull stuff out of and they're friendly, outgoing, got great personalities. They have a genuine interest in others and what they do.
Misty, any ideas where you gained these skills from?
Honestly, probably my mom and dad. My dad's very outgoing. I guess just growing up and watching them,
Yeah, it's interesting when you're looking at thinking outside the box, when we go back to the flawless thinking model, the expressive and amiable. The expressive is the outgoing energy. I know that comes as a huge shock to all of you, but that's the least energy I have. That's my expressive is dead last. Every human being has some seeds of all of it, but the seeds of the expressive are very, very small with me. But that expressive personality is the outgoing, very kind, nurturing and gentling. That's the amiable. So that's the ball personality, things not being conflict with others. So if you chose that, that's going to be that. So these are really nice. That's my second least energy. So anything that you see here from me is all fake. No, it's not fake. It's just I've developed these. Oh, Elise, you're not supposed to be laughing. You're supposed to be what? And so we need to get more light on Bill, though, so we can see his facial expressions. I'm sure he's not.
I'd rather stay in the dark, Mark.
All right. So I tend to be, I think I'm a pretty good problem solver. As a matter of fact, I love, like I said to a couple of my kids the other day, if dad's involved in something, there's a problem. Like that's just, I don't know what it is, but that, dad's involved, that's a problem solver. Each of the four different personalities can see, and I think our parents, like Misty, comes up with, I think a lot of insight about like our parents. Like neither of my parents were really outgoing. Neither of them were expressive. I have a daughter that's very expressive, and she's not a Boersma. She is, but it's not the Boersmas that I grew up with. So she's very outgoing. So we do learn. People ask, where do you get your personality? It seems like the geo personality and the geo test, it comes from the from like genetic or birth order, a combination of those. And then the pain quadrant might be more environmental. It seems like those are pretty solid. They don't change. Abuse or drugs or trauma, or major health things, can that change it? Seems like they can, but we're not really sure how. And so each of the four personalities can think outside the box by actually doing something that they're not comfortable with. So if somebody were to say, so Mark, for you, something uncomfortable is being nice, would that be fair to say? My wife and kids would be like, that's totally fair to say. My nice is very different. I think being nice to people is being direct with them. And so the driver personality is going to be thinking outside the box when they're amiable or expressive. Like being expressive it's easy for me to be expressive around my grandkids, and then up on the stage when I'm speaking, I've learned I need to do that. But outside of that, I like to stay in the driver analytic driver world. Bill, you're a pretty proficient, a very proficient problem solver. Where do you get that from?
Blessings of God, I guess.
Oh, so your wife and kids.
That's it.
That's what I was thinking too. Elise, you're a really good problem solver, and you're exceptionally good at preventing problems from coming up. Too. Any ideas, Elise, on where you get your problem solving or problem preventing skills from?
No, not particularly. I mean, I think in the past it has irritated me when problems arise that should have been caught. And so in certain areas, I'm better at trying to stay ahead of that or anticipating those. Rather than some areas, I'm not as good at it. So, no.
I'm thinking a lot of things that I don't know if I should say. And so this is a good time for the three of you to jump in really quick. If you don't jump in, I'm going to say,
don't run down that rabbit hole, Mark.
I know. I know. Especially with Elise. Because I'm like that, man, I didn't ask her for permission to do that. Anybody have anything before I go into outside the box thinking and connecting to problem solving?
Well, I guess in terms of, as you're thinking of your team, when you have some of your team that aren't as strong in that area, what do you think are the best ways to help them see that? And maybe that is just some direct conversation with examples of certain areas, but to help build them up in that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think teaching people different personalities. Like everybody tends to think that everybody thinks like them. They don't. And everybody tends to think, that their personality is the best one, but it's not. And so I think, Elise, like the 2 years that I changed into being an amiable, the 3 years I changed into being expressive, when I changed my personality, now this does have some side effect. My kids say, Dad, you don't have bipolar, you have quad or quinpolar. Like others have said, Mark, you may be the most high functioning, mentally insane person, mentally ill person that we know. I take that as a compliment. But when I switched over personalities to an amiable, I saw things about the amiable I'd never seen before. For example, the driver hates when things get out of control. So what they do is they work really hard to prevent that from happening because it creates so much pain. But when I switched over to the amiable personality, I allowed more and more stuff to get out of control. And I used to think poorly, but I didn't recognize it because my wife is amiable. So I didn't recognize it. But I used to look down on amiables in that, they just, I don't know, they just aren't strong and they just aren't this and this. What's interesting is I didn't have bitterness issues until I switched over to the amiable. And then I started having struggles with bitterness. Why is that? The driver, if you have an issue, you just throw up on people. Like you just tell them what it is. You feel a lot better, but the people around you do not feel better. And so when I started holding things in, I started to see the strength of the amiable. When I was switched over for 3 years to the expressive personality, I started to see the strength of the expressive personality. And so I think understanding that our greatest strength is our greatest weakness, and our greatest weakness is just our greatest strength, misapplied is taking a strength and carrying it too far. I think when we really internalize that, we start to become actually more confused. Like the inner quadrant personality, the chameleon personality that has naturally, I have all 4 of these, but it's not natural. I mean, I go back to driver and analytic any chance I get. But the chameleon, the 55-55, or, if you're switching over between analytic and expressive and driver and amiable, when you're doing these types of things, it gives your brain the ability to shift into gears and say, we have a choice. So most people think they have a choice on how they think or act or feel, but they really don't. They don't. They have a feeling, and that feeling they think is actually real. I mean, it is a real feeling, but it doesn't mean it's truth. It's just a feeling. And so what do we do with those feelings in being able to go through that? And so I think, Elise, when we switch over, it's the highest level of coaching I've experienced, and it's called counterintuitive coaching. It's doing the opposite of what we know will work, which is insane to do. Like, it makes no sense at all. So Bill does not mind when I bring in the spiritual element to it. So, just be a second if this offends you. I apologize. It's from my perspective. You can take whatever you want and discard the rest. I believe from a spiritual perspective, I believe we're all creating God's image. I believe every single one of the 8 billion plus people in the world are very, very special. And they've been put on this planet to do something very, very special. And so I look at every human being as being just an amazing creation. And I know Bill does too, and his team. And so what does that have to do with personalities? I believe that God gives us 1 or 2 or some 3 or 4 personalities plus their soul. I only have 2, really: driver, analytic, expressive. I think that when we become prideful, so that's the opposite, of humble. When we become prideful of our own personalities, that God says, this is me saying, I think God says, fine, take ownership of your gifts that I've given you. And those gifts then become weights around our neck. So the analytic will think, I'm really, really smart. Well, you're really good at a lot of details. You can get details and nobody even cares about. And you know what? A lot of times they're not important, honestly. You have a hard time seeing the big picture. The driver is crazy insane in quantity and quality of work, but sometimes they do run over people. Sometimes they don't even ask for forgiveness, and they'll run them over again. So the driver's really, really good, but they'll miss details. They'll make mistakes. They'll go ahead and not see about people and not understand maybe the damage they're doing to people. The expressive, I mean, you're funny to strangers, but maybe to your own spouse or people closest to you, maybe you're not as funny as you think you are. And maybe you're not as good at getting tasks done. And maybe you can get other people to do the work for you, but can you do the work yourself? And the amiable, I mean, of course, you're the nice, caring, loving person that you are. Maybe not. Maybe you just tell people what they want to hear. Like, is that really being nice to them? I mean, to tell them just what they want to hear. So each of the 4 personalities, I think, Elise, when they learn to think outside the box, they think immediately, I could be wrong. Maybe I ought to try something else. And when we try something else, it probably isn't going to work, or we don't think it's going to work. So this is what's confusing. We're going into the deep end now. So we can think something works when it doesn't. We can think something doesn't work when it does. We can think we're being mean when we're really being nice. And we can think we're being nice when we're really being mean. I remember when I was I think it was middle school, when I first saw a hard object like your desk, and I saw that it had molecules that moved. So you have a desk that moves, but you would swear it's not moving, it's standing still. But when we look into another dimension, we start to see things. And I think I love when I, ask people, are you outside the box thinker? And they're like, what box? And so and then I think, Elise, helping people to understand that what we think we see in the past may not be really what happened. What we think is happening in the present may not actually be. I mean, it's not that it's all wrong, but it's not all true. And so and then being able to be really thankful and grateful. And so, I'm very thankful and grateful for Kristen. I won't share Kristen's last name, but Kristen, she changed my life forever. Like she has really humbled me. I am very frustrated about that situation. So there's 3 elements to frustration. It's how hard we work, how much we care, and our level of expectation of myself, systems, and other people around me. And so when I get frustrated, like Kristen's frustrated me a lot, like really a lot. And I hope she's okay. I really do. But it's challenged my thinking. I'm like, it shouldn't happen like that. I don't know if Elise or Bill or Misty, if any of that makes sense to any of you, or if that's just rambling.
No, I think it does. Yeah. I mean, I think probably when it's a new concept, you probably start with 1 or 2 people in your organization and help them to see at a deeper level their strengths and weaknesses and what they could do differently to incorporate additional problem solving skills, or whatever the topic is, and then see how that works and go from there. So I think it's daunting because it feels like you're telling someone, well, it's a sensitive topic to have a conversation with somebody and say, these are the things that don't come easily to you, and here's how you need to do better at that. And depending on the relationship with that team member, it can be well received or not well received. So,
I'm looking through this and I'm looking at segment 3, the quantum thinking. When we ask questions, we listen, and we listen at a different dimension. And then that helps us to see things differently, which then helps to reveal our intentions and other people's intentions. That helps us to think differently, which gives us new capabilities, which then we internalize, which then gives us the ability to do something in a different way. And when we do all of that, what happens? Peter Miles, past board member of BMW, said, okay, so we become awakened through questions. We listen, that gives us the why. That gives us the ability to see and give insights. That purifies our intentions and the intentions of others, which then leads to radical thinking, which then leads to leverage, which gives us new capability, which helps us to, through internalization, change, and all that leads to failure. What? And that seems to be the human condition. Bill, Misty, any other thoughts either of you have?
No, sir.
I think
Bill?
it takes time to build that, and you have to have a rapport with a person where they understand your thinking to arrive at what we think is correct. And arriving at that correct answer as quickly as possible is the challenge, Mark.
Right? Like first responders, I mean, they actually do studies on this, and it's like, I don't know, it's like if you're 25 seconds late, X number of people die. I love the military. I mean, I do. I love police officers. I love, first responders, because you make a mistake, people die. Like you talk about living a life of significance. And I mean, it doesn't matter what the reason is. Like, well, nobody's perfect. Well, somebody died.
One thing that they are really testing now in the military is AI, where they give a scenario and then they give it to their top intelligence and they come up with an answer, and AI comes up with a different answer, and they both perform it. And over time, individuals are learning to trust the AI more because it's come up with the right decision. Now, how can we come up with that right decision quicker?
Right. Remember, I did a 30-minute strategy session on a guy, and at the end, he's like, I have never been through anything like this. He said he used to work in the FBI. He says, Mark, they have stuff in the FBI that that is powerful, but this personality stuff this stuff's more powerful than what the FBI has. And this was like 20 years ago. And he said, I want to be coached by your company and specifically by you. And I said, well, I'm not sure if I'm the right person for it, but we'll see. And he says, and I may have asked him like why. And he's like, Mark, do you understand if I understood what you understood, like what could happen if I go into a bar with women? And we didn't take him on as a client for that very reason, because it's like, so there's tells, there's things that do, and that triggered years ago. I had something about integrity. I'll have to try to dust that one off and look at that and see if there's a question. The coachability question, that took 18 and a half years to figure that one out.
And I think that goes back to Kristen. How can you jump in and see what a person's true integrity is and ethics are?
The integrity question, if I remember correctly, it was like how frequently do you say you're going to do something and you don't do it? And you'd think, well, people that don't have integrity, they're not going to tell you the truth. But people, it's amazing. And then you say, so when's the last time? Like, I remember one employee, and she came on, went through our whole systems. This was probably over 20 years ago. And she came in and she was hired. And I don't know, within a couple weeks, she, it was before she got paid, so maybe a week. And she said, hey, I need an advance. Could you give me an advance? And I talked to her some about it. We decided to give her advance. And like the day after we gave her the advance for 2 weeks or something, and she'd only worked a week or something, she quit. And I did an exit interview, and I'm like, are you going to pay back the money? And she's like, no. And I'm like, how do you rationalize that in your own mind? She said, well, I had marriage vows and I violated those, so why would I keep this? I'm like, okay, I guess that makes sense. So yeah, Kristen, there's going to be a Kristen principle. There's going to be something out there that we're going to figure out that's going to break through it. The one thing that came to mind earlier in this is what gives us the ability to think outside the box. What gives us the ability to, and I think what it is I think it's often childhood trauma. Something that happened in our childhood that was very traumatic and caused us to think differently and think outside the box, or not. Like, we didn't heal from the trauma, so we get it literally, it's like you cut a tree off, at the root or something, it doesn't grow. So that part of the brain actually stops working. And so I'm actually doing a lot of work on that right now. So if you all think about, I remember when I was 19 years old and I had trauma that I'd never had in my life ever before. I mean, this thing hurt so deep. Like, it was like my whole life was, it was crazy how much it hurt. And I think it did something literally to my brain where it rewired my brain into where that is probably the defining moment in my life where I could have gone left or I could have gone right. And it's like, what am I going to choose to do? I'm going to choose to take that moment of massive, massive emotional pain, and I'm going to turn that into something beautiful. So you guys can think about that, because I think when we look back into it, I think a lot of the ways that we think, like John Henderson, friend and mentor of mine, he says you can learn more from a bad leader than you can a good one. And so if that's true, which I believe it is, you can learn more from a bad situation in life than a good situation. And so are we learning the things that we need to be learning in life? And so anyways, so if any of you that are watching this podcast or listening to this podcast, if any of you think you understand any of these, lessons, for sure, give me a call. I'll give you my direct line, actually. It's 630-393-9909. So if you think you get any of these figured out, call me and explain it to me. Because it seems like the more I get into all of these 12, the more I know about them, the more I know I don't know about them. And I think that that's okay, which actually leads to our next podcast, which is Humble and Growing. So hopefully you're sharing this with other people. I like to think that what we're doing here is going to make a difference in the worlds around us. But if other people aren't exposed to this, your spouse, your family, your children, kids, friends, peers, clients, like if we're not sharing this and we're not here to tell you how to do these things. Like we're just pilgrims all going along in life together, seeking to try to figure this stuff out. And I think the more we know, the more we don't know. And so you may have some insights, and for sure, share those thoughts. And if you have any questions on anything we covered in today's podcast, connect with the individual who invited you to participate, or you can call toll free 888-230-2300, outside the US 630-393-9909. And always remember, we can accomplish so much more together than we ever could on our own. Have an amazing day. Bye-bye.